curious about you and your first contact with Dr. Dino.
Yes, how did you come to meet Dr. Dino, Kent Hovind?
Building 13 at the University of West Florida had physics in it, and it also had anthropology and archaeology in the same building. And anthropologically, he was a very interesting person. And there was a professor, Terry Pruitt, who is one of the country's, if not the world's, experts in semiotics. And please don't ask me to explain semiotics.
Well, I could actually explain because I went to Brown University and we had the only graduate department of semiotics. And just to completely go sidebar for 30 seconds, but the students who at Brown who majored in semiotics were usually those students who had no idea what they wanted to do after college, and you know, were sort of had their head in the clouds.
Yeah.
Today, the 5 friends of mine with the biggest positions of power in Hollywood were all semiotics majors at Brown University. So I do know Pruitt's name through my studies in semiotics.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Terry's a very interesting fellow. And anyway, we were in the same building, and so he obviously was an eclectic thinker. And so he would invite Kent once a year, sometimes twice a year, to discussions in front of students and things like that. And of course, Kent loved that, you know. And so he would be there. And so I think that's the first time that I met him, that I would attend those things. And I only met him hello like that. I didn't know him at all then.
So are you inferring that Dr. Pruitt was studying Dr. Dino?
To some degree, and the other part of this, though, was that department was then headed by Dr. Dallas Blanchard. And Dr. Dallas Blanchard was, and probably still is, a national authority on the rise of the religious right in this country, and particularly in violent anti-abortion stuff. So Dallas, over his career, he died a few years ago, but over his career, he went to every place that he could get to in the United States and Canada and interviewed people who owned clinics, interviewed police chiefs, interviewed everybody that had anything to do with this violence. And of course, he couldn't be everywhere if he were Superman, and he wasn't Superman in that he suffered from Crohn's disease. So one of the big trials here is when there was a bombing here, and it turns out that 3 students were involved in this bombing, and he wrote a book that centered on that. And he was doing the same thing that you were doing, which is going to the trial every day, but because Crohn's is not at all predictable, then he had the arrangement with Terry, so anything that Dallas could not attend, Terry went to that. So all of that was mixed in, and since I was at that time either just before or just after I became president of the board of the local Unitarian thing, fellowship it was then.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you to define thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we went through a normal Unitarian fight over whether we should change it from fellowship to church. So you coming from that area of country knows what
Right.
that's about.
So my understanding from some other Unitarians in this town is that, you know, some people thought that church was a more practical term in a city where there's basically a church every block.
And everybody asks what church you go to.
Yes, that is a common question you get asked whenever
very quickly,
you first meet somebody.
What church
do you go to? Yeah.
So anyway, so what happened after a time Kent was always trying to find ways to enhance or create like what they call it, but it's intelligent design. And so when something would catch his eye, he would call the physics department and he would ask questions about things that were going on and he would try to find a way. Well, he burned out the professors who were there. And so it got to be for a time that when he would call for a question about it, that they would say, let Bill talk to him.
So in effect, Bill became Kent's handler.
Ah, I see. And
Well-
how was that?
Well, it was fun. It's fun. Like I say, he's an amazingly engaging guy, and he has this aura that reminds me of Paul Hill, and a number of them have that, is that they just are so sure that they are right that they will do that. So anyway, well, the one thing that I remember...
So in the few minutes we have left.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, he called one day and he said, how many switches or circuits in microprocessors now, okay, what is the current number of that? And this was about the time that Pentium processors were coming up. And I don't know what you know about that, but they first had like several thousand transistors in a CPU in the first ones, and then it went up and up and up. And about the time that Pentiums came, it got up to be like 1 million switches inside a microcontroller. And I sort of kept up with that. And so I told him about where I thought it was now, and I explained to him Moore's law, which is that it seems to double every year or 18 months, which continues to hold true. Now it's 300 billion rather, and that are commercially available, and some of them are 500,000. Anyway, so I told him then it was about 1 million. He said, do you know how many synapses there are in the brain of a honeybee? I said, no, I don't know that. And he says, well, it's about 900,000 to 1 million. And I said, yeah. And he says, that proves it. And I said, that proves what? He says, it proves intelligent design. And it made some kind of sense to him. And those are the kind of programs that he would build.
You were an escort.
Yes.
Tell us briefly about that, and then if there was any connection, or if you ever saw Dr. Dino at anti-abortion protests, or his...
Some of his
people.
missionaries, employees?
Absolutely. That's where we first knew it, because we had to generate our own intelligence, and from the work that Dallas had and all the other stuff, I mean, it was in the middle of a lot of information about a lot of different people. And so at the clinics, we would have Catholic protesters who were mostly respectful and not ugly, with few exceptions. There were a couple of them pretty ugly. But it was the Southern Baptist and Assembly of God, several of the denominations, not all of the congregations in this area, but several of them became very, very active. And one of the things that we noticed, that there was a crew of young men who were pretty faithful being at the clinics. And we came to know, I talked to all of them. It's one of the things that I did. I talked to everybody, so, because fear is what really causes problems. So what I would do is anything I could to minimize that. Anyway, talked to a couple of the guys, and some of the guys talked about being missionaries. And then we also noticed that occasionally, not every week, but every couple weeks, and whenever there were new people, we would see this motorcycle go by. And we could see that everybody would turn and wave at the motorcycle. And so I eventually did that and found out that a number of these people were, by whatever association, in the were anti-abortion protesters, fairly hardcore. And I believe that his son Eric was there for some time. I think that's his name of his son. But there were several other there who were there. And on one or two or three occasions, he actually stopped the motorcycle and would talk to people. And all that I could overhear is such and such a person here or not? So it looked like he was just checking to make sure that the people who were supposed to be there, that he was responsible for or had committed to be there, were there. And that's the sense I got of it.
So almost like a shift supervisor.
In a sense. And he was never ugly himself. He really got chastened by his loss of his association with Pensacola Christian College. And as you know, the place that he has is right on the edge of Pensacola Christian College.
Yes.
And at one time they were sort of connected. And then when the first part of his tax trouble started to happen, Pensacola Christian College said, this is not good for our PR, and they sort of gave him whatever he thought was his, and they paid a bunch of taxes that before I think they were trying to not pay, but they decided that they were not going to be hung with an anti-tax person.